Good morning, everybody. We're going to be filling out this form, the one that says fractions on the front and decimals on the back. So make sure you take this out. A lot of you got this. If you don't have this, it means you know everything about fractions and decimals. You know how to divide fractions. If the teacher asks you, hey, how do you divide fractions? You would know exactly what to tell them. If it also means you understand everything about decimals, you know how to multiply decimals, how to add decimals, everything else about how to add fractions that have different denominators. I mean, you should have this unless you are absolutely perfect with all that decimal fraction work. If you don't have one and you need one, you're like, maybe I don't know all of that, then raise your hand and get one of those before we get started. So the goal is to have a perfect example of everything that is on this sheet. So you'll have an explanation and then a perfect example. So let's get started. First one says how to add or subtract fractions. So when we add or subtract fractions, it depends if the denominators are the same or if they're different. If the denominators are the same, this is how you add fractions. Just go ahead and write this fraction right here, kind of small, so you have room for more. So let's write the fractions right here. And we're going to write 2/5 plus 1/5 equals 3/5. All right, we cut something into 5 equal parts. If at first you take 2 of those parts, and then later you take one more, then altogether you've taken 3 out of 5 parts. Notice that we do not add the denominators. This didn't suddenly turn into 10 parts, right? It's still out of 5. So add the numerators, keep the denominators the same. That's your perfect example. And now the little bit slightly harder one. So make room over here for one with different denominators. 2/5 plus 1/2. Now, these parts are shaped differently. So this would be like taking 2 out of 5 and then adding a half. Well, the parts are different. I can't just shove the fifths in here. I can't shove the fifths in there and say, hey, I have 1, 2, 3 out of 4 because the parts are different. It would be like giving you a tiny part of a cookie and going, hey, you have 1/2 of the cookie. You got one part out of 2. If we're talking fractions, they have to be the exact same size. So we can't just add those like that. They're different sizes. So we have to make them the same denominator. We have to make them the same size. We have to cut them up somehow to make them all exactly the same size, and then we can combine them. So what we do is we got to find a common denominator. If you're not sure how to do it, one way to do it is skip count by this denominator and write it down. Skip count a couple times. Skip count by this denominator and write it down. And then see if there's a number that they can both become. Is there a number that oh, look, they can both become a 10. All right, so you found a common denominator. Another way to do it is to just multiply these two numbers, but sometimes that's going to give you a really big number and then you're going to have to reduce. So it's better to find the smallest number they can both become by skip counting. So here they can both become tens. Let's go ahead and write the tens. So where you write the fraction, go ahead and show the new fractions underneath that they both became 10. How did they become a 10? This one got 2 times bigger, right? Times 2. So what are we going to do with this number? Also make it 2 times bigger. How did this become a 10? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It got 5 times bigger. So what are we going to do with this number? Make it 5 times bigger. You just did proportions again. So 2/5 is the same as 4 out of 10, and 1/2 is the same as 5 out of 10. Now that they're the same denominator, we can just go ahead and add them together, okay? So different denominators, we have to turn them into the same denominator and then add or subtract them. It works the same for subtraction. All right, now it's going to get easier. Let's keep going to where it says how to multiply fractions right here. And if you read it, it says to multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. Pretty easy. So if you have 1/2 times 1/2, let's see, there's a candy bar and you start off with half of it and you only have half of it, and then you give your friend half of that. How much did you give them? Well, remember, all parts with fractions have to be the same, so we have to make them all the same size. Now they're all the same size. So if you gave them half of half, how much did you give them? You gave them 1 part out of 4. Okay, 1 part out of 4. So half of a half leaves you with 1/4. And the easy thing is we just multiply straight across, just straight across. Super easy to multiply fractions, okay? Straight across. Dividing fractions, I'll do a silly demonstration on Monday on why this rule exists. It'll be fun. What we do when we divide fractions is we flip the second one, and it says that on your notes. So go down to where it says divide fractions and write this perfect one. You already wrote that there. So to divide fractions, we flip the second one. So instead of 1/2, it's going to be 2/1. And we multiply instead. So we multiply instead. 1 times 2 is 2. Remember, to multiply fractions, we just go straight across. 2 times 1 is also 2. And I'll show you why this rule exists, because we should know why things are, and it's kind of funny. All right, so we can multiply if we flip the second one, only the second one. So write that down and have your perfect example of dividing fractions. Almost done. All right, next, to add decimals. If you are adding or subtracting decimals, so we're on the back side now, we're going to write this problem right here. To add or subtract decimals, you have to line up the decimal points. Line up the decimal points and then put whatever else there is. So line up the decimal points, okay? So $3.50 plus a quarter, you have to line up the decimal points. Let's say it was $3.50 plus 2 dimes. Let's just say it was just says plus 0.2. You're not going to do 0.2 way over there. Okay, that doesn't work for adding and subtracting. You have to line up the decimals. Okay, line up the decimals when you add or subtract. I think we had a quarter here first, so let's go back to that. And you would have $3.75. So add and subtract, you line up the decimals. You're not going to memorize all this. That's why you have these notes, and you can use them during any quiz, okay? And our last one, when we multiply decimals, we do not line up the decimals. So let's say you had $3.50 and you want to know, well, what's half of that? What's 0.5 of that? Then we do not line up the decimals. When we multiply decimals, we just scoot the second one all the way over, okay? And we just multiply like normal. Like, let's pretend there were no decimals. You would multiply this 5 times everything. You're going to get 5 of those, 5 of those, and 5 of those. So let's see, 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 more is 17. And here is the simple rule when you multiply decimals. It's not that scary once you know the rule. Here's the rule. Count how many numbers there are after the decimals in the problem. How many numbers are there after the decimal in the problem? Let's see. There's 1 number, 2 numbers, 3 numbers. There's 3 total numbers after the decimal in the problem. So guess what? There needs to be 3 total numbers after the decimal in the answer. However many numbers there were after the decimal, that's how many there needs to be after the decimal in the answer. Here, there's 3. So there needs to be 1, 2, 3 numbers after the decimal. All right, so half of $3.50 is $1.75. All right, so that's the rule for that. Count how many decimals there are after in the problem. How many numbers after the decimal? Make sure there's that many on there. All right, write this down. You have a perfect example of everything so far with fractions and decimals. For the rest of this period, you're going to work on this fun sheet on turning a decimal into a percent or a fraction, or turning a fraction into a decimal or percent. You have to know how to work between decimals and fractions and percents in order to do math well and to do probability. So your teacher will help you with this. You can partner up and then work on these problems down here if you finish this. If you're done with everything and your teacher gives you a star and writes your name down that you and your partner did well, and she might ask your partner to explain something. If your partner can't explain it, you're both getting a bad mark. That means you didn't really work together. Somebody slacked off. So make sure your partner can explain it, anybody that she asks. So fill this out. Once you're done with your packet and this, then you can work on any Prodigy questions you still have. Or if you don't get to that today, that's okay. We'll work on that on Monday. But if you finish both of these and there's still time left, you can work on Prodigy. All right, have fun. I'll see you Monday.